Subbu, hi, good to have you with us. How have you been?
Hi, very good, Ashu. And yeah, this is an exciting year that we are in the midst of. Yep.
Oh,
Thank
absolutely.
you
And
for having us. Yep.
it's a pleasure to have you, Subbu. And this is an important conversation. I mean, fintech is a subject, and banking and financial industries, BFSI, right, as we classically call it, is something which is very close to my heart. I started my career as a banker. And this is something that I've continued to, being extremely bullish about, invested in, right, and an enthusiast, right, in terms of what's happening. And you are essentially at the core of things, where you're empowering a lot of these institutions to deliver some phenomenal value, right? Thus, it becomes an important conversation in that context. Uh,
Yep.
so before we do that, right, it'll be a great start to have a quick round of introduction about you, about Maverick Systems, right, and then we dive into the topic, right, where we discuss what's happening, what's new in the banking and financial services industry, right? The consumer expectation is changing, right? I'd love to discuss more of those points, but a quick round of introduction as a starting point will be phenomenal.
Yeah. Thank you, Ashu. See, Ashu, I think this journey goes back almost some 21 years when a few of us colleagues who were in management consulting, working with large Indian corporations, we got together and started Maverick in early 2000. And over these last 21 years, I think there are a few things which have remained unchanged about who we are and what we do. And essentially, they are Maverick as an IT services provider is among the few organizations that is singularly focused on IT services around banking.
Interesting.
And within banking, it's not as if we focus on all areas, because banking is, I mean, the more we work in it, the more we realize that it is such a huge space. So within banking, we primarily work in retail banking, corporate banking, and wealth as three core areas, where as an organization, our focus is at any point of time to work on the top few challenges that CXOs may have in the business today, and see how we can align our solutions to kind of help overcome those challenges. So at any point of time, therefore, even within these LOBs, there are certain named areas where we focus our energies. For example, today, a lot of our work is in the area of how do I enhance a bank's ability to maximize revenues in these
Right.
challenging times. How do I help banks enhance customer experience?
Right.
How do I help them achieve better operational efficiency by working on their digital operation strategy?
Interesting.
Regulatory compliance is another big challenge, which
Right.
is continuously evolving. So very briefly, these are the kind of things that we do in supporting CXOs in banks.
Super. So I think for many people who are gonna be watching this, right? These are some, as when you look at it, fair enough. When you're talking about corporate banking, you're talking about wealth management and all that, right? And you know it, and I know it, right? When you start digging deeper into it, right? These are fairly complex, verticals within a banking, domain, right? I'd love you to throw a little more light, right? What are, for example, these products, right? Or is this a bespoke play that you do, right, for each bank? Because the requirement could be different. The way they tackle their customer at the end of the day, that's what banking is all about, right? Um, uh, uh, you know, how does that relationship come through, right? I'd love you to take us through some case studies, right? Because those case studies will help us understand how, for example, certain banks are approaching this, and how are you enabling this. I'd love to hear from you on that particular bit.
Just maybe just one or two examples, Ashu. For example, recently, we were working with a global top 15 bank in the
Sure.
Asia Pacific region. And one of the areas where we supported them in the area of revenue maximization is we, for example, worked on developing a solution around what we call a buy now, pay later as a product.
All right.
What it means is today, for example, if I walk into an electronics chain,
Right.
and say that I'm buying this high-end laptop, for example, and immediately on the floor of that shop, some bank guy will be roaming around. He'll say, boss, I can give you some EMI on this product. That's the way it works. So
Right.
it is not that's the current experience. Whereas with the kind of solution that we have developed, what happens is when I walk into this electronics chain, actually in a very seamless manner, I can actually buy a product, and the same chain actually white labels and offers a financing solution on that product, which is from a customer perspective, it is completely seamless. So it's almost, as a customer, it will be as if that shop is giving me funding my purchase, So therefore, the whole process is actually completely seamless, and the chain is almost white labeling the lending solution and offering me a product which I can very seamlessly purchase even online. So similarly, if you look at, for example, in the regulatory space, one of the biggest challenge that today most large banks have is with respect to data.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, what happens, Ashu, is most of these large banks have essentially grown through a number of acquisitions and integrations over a period of time, right? And so what happens is data itself becomes very complex over a period of time. You have, for example, for the same Subramanian, there might be 5 different types of Subramanian with first names, different middle names, different last names, but the person could be the same. And now regulators are increasingly saying this is not okay. So you need to really get your data in shape and to be able to have up-to-date KYC and so on and so forth. So for example, we have developed certain solutions in terms of entirely automating the process of identifying and fixing quality issues in this entire data pipeline.
Interesting.
To be for the bank to be able to make more accurate, meet the regulatory reporting requirements in a more accurate manner. And even I think this whole process even helps the banks to really in a real way know their customer, because today the data is so fragmented and existing in different places in different pockets. Getting it all together and cleaning it up and bringing a certain amount of quality itself it's a huge plus, not only from a regulatory standpoint, even from a business standpoint. So
Right.
These are the kind of real life issues that we would be working on and working with banks to solve them.
Interesting. So I have so many questions, right? Around, of course, the way data, for example, has existed in banking institutions, right? Banking institutions were never prepared for, the kind of change that is required today, right? I mean, you're talking about BNPL, you're talking about a bunch of other things, right? Now banks are experimenting with a lot of these things, and that requires them to have that fundamental data structure, right? But before
Correct.
I come to that, right? So I want to understand what kind of cycles are you dealing with, right? I mean, because at the end of the day, a lot of private banking institutions, of course, have a little more sensitivity, right? But as soon as you start talking of, say, government-backed, financial institutions, right? Do they understand, the change which is coming into the ecosystem? What's your sense of it, right? How challenging is that? How challenging in general is onboarding a customer, right? Because, a lot what you're doing is essentially, of course, course correcting and preparing them for future. But do they even realize that the consumer market has shifted and changed completely, right? How challenging, I want to understand, is that process of acquiring these institutions?
Are you talking of customer onboarding?
No, I'm talking about the role of CXOs in adoption of latest technology, right? The sensitivity of understanding the consumer expectations changed, and they need to course correct very quickly, and your role in that.
See, believe me, I mean, CXOs are fully seized of and fully cognizant of what is required, and today more than ever, Ashu, I can say this with a lot of confidence because we've been seeing this over the last 20 years. Today's CXO out there is a lot more business aware. And today's CIOs are, for example, they understand the business a lot more deeply than probably the way it was 15, 20 years back. Then
Right.
CXOs, even CIOs, CTOs were a lot more tech guys. Today, if you look at CIOs, they are very, very strongly rooted in understanding the business first. And
Right.
therefore, they, at least when I say this, I'm talking of global 15, 20 banks, the top 10 banks in India. CXOs are very, very well understood of business priorities. They are understood of tech challenges. They are understood of priorities, which areas to focus on. Some of the new areas, like you said, AI and ML and so on and so forth, they are fully understood of areas that need to be prioritized. But most of these are such large organizations. It is the whole prioritization and making investments available when even top line and bottom line are so challenging. I think those are the challenges, but they are fully seized of what needs to be done, if you ask me.
Interesting. So I want to understand, right? I mean, given that you are, you are very well integrated in that, into the leadership, right? When you're working with a financial institution, right? What I want to understand is the sensitivity of leadership today around innovation, right? I mean, what we've seen is absolutely phenomenal. I think our banking ecosystem was never, I mean, they never prepared for, say, for example, a UPI like platform, right, to come up. A lot of that alignment has happened now. The data structure, something that you alluded to, and right, and of course, and I think it's a huge challenge within traditional banking ecosystem, right? Is the is the data existing in silos, right? Now, this data never comes in and interacts with each other, right? And that brings in a very uh, you know uh, that is required as on date. That's required, right? That data that exists in various pockets across world, various products, help you predict the behavior better, right? Risk management on the consumer side is completely different, right? So the challenges are now kind of increasing. I want to understand what's the sensitivity of leadership around innovation in banking, right? Because I mean, with UPI, we've seen players like Bharat Pay and many others come in. BNPL is a huge product which fintechs have leveraged phenomenally, right? I mean,
See,
banking today.
the challenge there, Ashu, is see what is happening today is the speed at which new technology, the speed at which new solutions uh, and new fintech players have come in the last 5, 6 years, it is completely unprecedented.
Right.
So invariably, therefore, what happens is many a times in large banks, there are a number of incremental initiatives that have taken place with respect to digital transformation.
Right.
So what is happening is when we talk of digital transformation, many a times, many of the banks, and you and I cannot say that was the right thing or wrong thing to do because various business compulsions are in play. So many a times, therefore, different digital transformation initiatives have been taken up. When I say that, for example, newer mobile banking applications or internet banking enhancements in retail, in corporate, in wealth, over a period of time would have happened. But slowly, what many banks have started realizing is a lot of these digital transformation initiatives that I have taken up are not all stitched together very well.
Right.
And what
Absolutely.
I mean by that is while a lot of transformation has happened in the presentation layer, in the layer which interacts with customer, at the back end, a lot of things are still happening in the old way. So, for example, while my internet banking, my mobile banking, and other things have changed, the way when I ask for a data on my mobile phone, the way it pings the back end and comes back to me with the kind of results that I need and the time it takes to do that, some of those things have not changed at all. And that's why the point that you're bringing about, one of the solutions Maverick offers to some of these leading banks is to create certain kinds of data lakes and data warehouses, which are really sitting in the middle, where we are putting together all these data from disparate sources and really presenting it in a way where a customer gets what he wants very quickly, business gets insights for decision making very quickly in very meaningful ways, and that is when the real transformation happens. Otherwise, you're just painting and packaging the outside, but a lot of what inside happens still happens in the same old way. So therefore, there is and when I say this, I might be oversimplifying it. It's a lot more complex than what I'm saying, and so it is not as if people just forgot and they did all this and suddenly realized data needs to. But that's the way it is developed. I mean, the complexity is of such a magnitude that these are things that we are contending with now, and many banks are doing very well in implementing solutions around this.
Right. Interesting. So I want to touch upon COVID, right? I mean, COVID has been an unreal situation, right? I mean, and I think no conversation can actually happen without COVID because it's been possibly an extremely critical and a marquee event which has happened in each one of our lives, right? But it's impacted businesses in a completely different way, right? The construct of business is going to change forever, right? I mean, we've seen that across industries. It's happening in banking and financial services as well in a big way, right? For example,
Correct.
your wealth management practice is essentially all moving
Correct.
digital, right?
Correct.
You have newer models that are coming up. We're seeing portfolio management services. It's a different play which is coming together, right? But
Correct.
also, what is happening is that there is a certain fear. So, two things, right, that I would love to understand from you, right? Is one, of course, the change and the shift that you've seen, and second, do you think this shift is going to be consistent, right? Because today, what has happened is as we get out of, and God forbid, we say the third wave, right? But as we get out and as we get back to normal, right? There's a huge or there's this clamor and conversation which is going on, right? That we are going to get back to normal, right? We are going to go back to say the infrastructure that we created, right? Technology could come back to where it started from, right? Do you think that's a right assessment to look at in the BFSI category, or is this a category which has changed forever, right? What's your sense of it?
It's a $1 million question, and I think a lot of people have different opinions around it. And so here is mine. See, I think, for example, a lot of our customers have over the last 2 years significantly pulled back on their branch networks, for example,
Right.
or in their field force that used to, like when you're talking of wealth management, one of the leading banks that we work with has actually successfully cut down. See, earlier for these high net worth individuals, there used to be a number of these. Each high net worth individual used to be given a relationship manager. Now, a lot of work of which was earlier done by these relationship managers are being automated now, and therefore I probably need half the number of relationship managers I need today than I
Right.
did in the past. So a lot of these things are happening. Branch networks are coming down, even ATMs are coming down, because people are using a lot less cash today than they used to in the past. So I think, I don't know when, but when we get fully back to normal, then also I think a large part of this may not really come back, because a lot of these changes that have happened are also advancements. They are not really, these are new user behaviors that people have adopted. Customers have found new ways of doing business, which are more convenient at the end of the day.
Absolutely. Right.
And therefore, people are going to expect similar and higher levels of service and convenience going forward, which only means that a lot of those older ways of working we may not even go back to.
Right.
The areas where I have stopped using cash, there's no way I'm going to go back to using cash in those areas. Or things that I'm not used to anymore visiting my bank to do, even in future I may not do. Even in India now, I mean, I don't even have to go to a bank to open an account. And I think
Right.
when such a convenience is available, even in
Right.
future, you're not going to go back to it.
Right. So when we talk of I think India as a market, right? I think we really cannot not talk about Bharat, right? Now Bharat all of a sudden has become so much more important, right? I think because of course this the prime minister, the current prime minister that we have, has always had this focus on digitizing, right? And there were Jan Dhan accounts that came up and all of that, right? So essentially the idea was to bring in everybody who existed in India, irrespective of where they were, whatever class that they were part of, whatever the income stratas that they were in. The idea was that everybody comes in and becomes part of this institutionalization process that is kind of the shift that is happening, right? Now Bharat brings in some very, very unique challenges, right? I mean, some very, very key challenges, right? Education levels are possibly a huge challenge, right? Literacy is a huge challenge. Products, for example, are a huge challenge because there is no foundation, right? Now, for a player like you who's essentially into empowering banking institutions and financial institutions to deliver better, right? It becomes important that you factor in a lot of these pieces, right? How challenging is that, right? To ensure that banking institutions can continue to deliver consistent experience irrespective of where people come from, what strata they come from, right? What's the literacy level? Tell me a little more about that, right? How difficult has that been for you to ensure the consistency in experience?
In fact, you'd be surprised, Ashu, that some of the customers that we work in India, some
Hmm.
of the leading banks that we have worked with in India,
Right,
they are a lot more demanding. They are a lot more up to date
right,
compared to many of the global banks and in developed markets that we work with.
right,
And in fact, I was we had a kind of a town hall at Maverick some 2 weeks back, and
right,
we had a global payments leader from UK who
right.
was addressing the entire gathering.
Hmm.
And you'd be surprised that many of those people are actually benchmarking
Right,
with India on some of the innovations that we have done on the payments
right.
infrastructure in India. And and to be fair, I think a lot of global players, right from Googles of the world, have done tremendous amount of work in the last decade on uh, multiple languages becoming technology enabled in multiple languages. Today,
Right.
for example, many of the payment systems as well as my online chatbots and things like that are not only adapted to all the Indian languages, they are even adopted to serious number of dialects within those languages. So
Interesting.
even if I actually today speak Hindi in a particular
Correct.
UP accent or a Haryana accent, the system will be able to pick it up. So I think underlying technology has matured quite a bit. And I think our own the investments the government has made and our top 5 banks in India have made, our payments infrastructure and services around it and things like that are comparable to the best in the world today.
Interesting. How challenging personally has that been for you as the leader, right? I mean, who's leading the pack?
See, I don't think see, I think the challenging part there is the underlying technology.
Right,
We are people who are more developing solutions around it. For
right.
example, we are also working in that payment space with some of the large providers in India. I
Hmm.
think I think a lot of that challenge is solved by the way the underlying technologies have developed. And I think the bigger challenge there is in terms of changing the user behavior, educating the users, and where we don't operate. So
Right.
thankfully, I can't claim credit for some of these things or having solved some of these things because they are helped at multiple levels. So any one provider or entity cannot claim credit for it. But I think we are moving perfectly in the right direction there.
Interesting. Subbu, before I move into the global expansion plans that you have, and I think you kind of focused on EU in a big way, right? Something you alluded to, right? And you've been constantly at it, right, for the longest time. Before I start talking about global markets, right? One last thing that I want to talk about, the Indian ecosystem, right? Is that the way fintechs have come up, right? I think 2016 onwards, we had many fintechs come up, right? It started from lending into evolved models of lending. We are seeing BNPL-like products. We are seeing credit cards, right? And now the offerings are becoming much larger, right? So we have insurtech players that are coming in. Wealth, for example, has gone through huge transformation, right? Earlier it used to be extremely cumbersome, right? To be making an investment, right? You had to call your relationship manager, something that you mentioned, right? And he or she will eventually process the form and so on and so forth, right? Now it's just about a few clicks and you made your investment, right? How for large banking institutions, something which is your core domain that you focus on, right? These fintechs are essentially, in a way, competing with them. They are taking away business from them, right? How do you see this relationship evolve over a period of time, right? What's your sense of it? Banking institutions are a large ship, right? For them to take decisions can take time, right? Startups are far more agile. They have the capital required. They're acquiring customers. They're solving very clear, pain point with single-minded focus, right? What's your sense of it, right? How do you see this entire ecosystem play out? It's a more macro question, and largely because you've been in this ecosystem for a very long time. You've seen the cycles that the industry's gone through, right? So would love to understand what kind of a relationship do you see evolve, right? What do you imagine, or what's your assessment of how the ecosystem is going to play out in the next couple of years? Because we are getting institutionalized, we are getting a lot more transparent, right? What's your sense of that?
See, my sense is, I think the leading banks across the world, including India, have realized that there was an early phase of this
Right.
whole development of these last 5 years, where
Right.
some of the larger banks were really seeing these fintechs as competition, people who are taking revenue streams away from them, so on and so forth. But
Right.
I think now, if you ask me, there is a very good realization that the large banks have to actually collaborate, partner, and integrate the offerings of many of these fintechs into their own offerings, white
Right.
label it, and take it forward. Because I think banks realize that the innovation, the speed of innovation, speed of taking a new offering to the market that
Right.
some of these fintech startups can do, the large banks will find it very difficult to do. So many of the large banks in UK, in US, and other places, even in Singapore, they have very quickly partnered with some of these fintechs and made it part of their offering. For example, if there is a fintech that is offering an exceptional service on cross-border, remittances,
Right.
then rather than a bank trying to come to a position where they can do that, they are just very quickly picking that up, partnering, integrating, and offering it to their customers.
Right.
Similarly, SME lending is another big space where large banks traditionally used to find it very difficult to service the SME lending segment. Their
Right.
needs were very different. They used to consume a lot of time, but ticket sizes were small. But today there are many fintechs, even in UK, you would know them, who are focusing on that. So larger banks are saying, why don't I partner with these guys? Because I have access to customers. These people have a very good solution. Why don't I combine and still leverage my access to market? Because these small fintechs can, I mean, they will take a long time to have the access to market that the larger banks have. So,
Right.
so I think there is going to be more and more collaboration, partnership, and a very healthy ecosystem developing. Rather, I don't see these are very unequal players to really talk of competition.
Right. No, I think some of the fintechs are actually have an aspiration of becoming a bank, but I think that's a discussion for a different time.
Correct,
Uh,
correct.
uh, so you have as Maverick Systems, right? You have clearly global aspirations, right? EU is becoming is a critical piece of your larger game plan, right? Tell me a
Yeah.
little more about it, right? Where are you on that, right? What are the next
See,
couple of years are going to be?
see, Maverick. One thing, Ashu, is we don't operate by markets. We don't
Right.
say as an organ because we are so banking focused and so focused on three LOBs within those banks.
Right.
We don't really say we are going to move to US or we are moving to this country or that country.
Mhm.
We are a very named account focused organization. So typically, when I say work in UK, we would have a very clear set of banks that we pick up and we
Right.
work with, because once we start working with the bank, our relationships typically go minimum 10-year plus. We hardly do one project and exit kind of
Right.
relationship. We don't have. Now, EU has been spotted by us. For our context, it is seen as a great opportunity for growth in the years to come. What we have done essentially is, in the three areas of focus which I mentioned earlier: customer experience, regulatory compliance, and digital operations. We have, over the last 9 to 12 months, identified 12 banks
Mhm.
between the Benelux region and Nordic region,
Okay.
which are two very vibrant markets within that areas in Europe. And we are very clear that the next 3 to 5 years, we would like to work with at least 60% of these banks that we have identified.
Interesting.
And we have gone beyond to even identify within each of these space, regulatory, regtech, and
Mhm.
digital operations. We have specifically identified which are the pain points and challenges that CXOs have in these
Right.
two regions. And our solution development is already in the pipeline, aligned to the kind of things that will make sense in this market, the kind of regulatory challenges coming up in the next few years, and how do we kind of align our solutions. That's the kind of work we've been doing in the last 9 months. So definitely, therefore, to answer your question, EU is a very key market for us. The team is on the ground, and we are already into execution of our strategy. but the focus very sharply is on a set of 12 banks that we have picked in that region to work with.
Very interesting. So one thing that I want to understand, right? And and of course, Indian market is going through the kind of compulsions that it is, right? And and that's also because we operate in many layers, right? But when you talk of markets like EU, right, which are fairly homogeneous, right? It's been very very consistent, very calibrated, right? Uh, how how difficult or complicated is the onboarding process of such clients, right? I mean, what goes into converting these relationships, right? Because my sense is that in a market like this where uh, the output clarity is higher, right? They typically they could be slightly more demanding, right?
Yeah,
In terms of output, right? I'd love to
correct.
understand, and and this is a conversation, of course. While of course I want to understand your interaction with these institutions, I think this is going to be a reference point for many other startups, right, who are possibly operating in a B2B environment, right, who
Correct.
aspire to cater to a developed market
Yeah.
client, right? So I'd love to hear with you from you on that one.
See, two things. I think Europe and especially, uh, I mean, we have operated in UK for the last almost 17 years now.
Right,
And this part of Europe that we are talking about now, Benelux and Nordic region, is very, very different from even doing business in the UK.
right,
And the planning cycles, banks typically think and plan much ahead in this
right,
region compared to the way they would plan in UK or even in US or in the Asia Pacific market. So
right,
definitely, therefore, we need to align ourselves with the way customer is thinking and planning on their technology programs.
right.
And also decision making time. I mean, it is customers take a lot more time to evaluate and then take you on board in this region compared to any other region. So it is a region where you don't want to be unless you want to go there with a long term view in mind. I mean, you don't go there for a quick project or two. This region is kind of not for that. So having said that, I think there is another fundamental shift that currently we are going through in the last 2 years, where, especially in our approach to this market, we are moving away from saying these are the 5 services that I want to take this to this market versus these are the 3 solutions to CXO challenges that I'm taking to this market. So
Interesting.
fundamentally, in our own minds, there is a big shift where we are not taking a portfolio of services or a set of competencies to say,
Right,
hey, tell me what can I do for you? These are the 10 things I can do. That
right,
is a completely different language
right,
versus we are approaching the market to say, hey, uh, to the leadership team of the bank, these are the 3 problems that I can solve better than anybody else for you.
right.
How is it that I can engage with you? And I think that is the way to get in quickly and deliver something which is tangible. And then a relationship can grow from that. So,
Very
therefore, the entire focus and our own preparation for that market is centered around precisely which are the 3 or 4 problems I can solve better than anybody in that market.
interesting. So I sense a shift towards productizing, right? And I think and that possibly
Hmm.
helps you in the conversion better. And I think that's what I
Correct.
gauge, right?
Correct.
And I think last 2 years has essentially been, I think everybody that we've had a chance to speak with, right, who's been in the banking and financial services ecosystem, right, has, I think, in a way, I think pivoted is too strong a word, right? But I think has shifted and changed gears to address it through a productized solution, right? I think which just makes the communication and conversion cycle so much more efficient, right? Uh,
Mhm.
a question. I'm going to take a step back, right, and a slightly more leadership oriented question, right? You know, uh, we've seen huge rush on in terms of venture capital coming into the country, right, and startups getting funded, right? You're a company which has largely been based, right, in your roots out of India, right? How challenging has the uh, the hiring scene been, right? Given that tech resources have become extremely expensive, right, with all the liquidity which we're flush with, right? What's
Yeah.
your sense of it? I think we're becoming a slightly more expensive market, right? So the arbitrage that we had vis-a-vis developed markets is in a way going away, right? Would love to hear from you on that, right? So how are you balancing that piece Do the cost structures continue to remain the same, or are we trying to solve for it with better intelligence, better knowledge, and the world is paying a premium for what we bring to the table, right? How are you looking at it as a business leader who's been running this organization, and your role has become all the more critical, right, as we go along, as
See,
banks
I think, I haven't heard the word labor arbitrage in a long time, because I think that word is almost vanishing from our dictionaries. Primarily because I think two things you raised in that, I'll address them one at a time. See, when we talk of technology and we talk of transformation, I'm just taking the example of banking. I think it is equally applicable to any other vertical as well. We are still having uh, two levels at which we are operating, because there is still, within the banking vertical, the legacy still exists, and the legacy will continue to exist even in the foreseeable future. It's not going away anywhere.
Right.
And then this entire digital transformation, the fintech transformation, the new emerging new horizon technologies, that is going to continue to grow and grow rapidly.
Right.
And so therefore you have, as an IT services firm, therefore you need to cater to both sides of this in a way.
Interesting.
And the answer to your question for these two parts of is very different. I mean, therefore, in the new age, in the
Right.
transformation space, in the new technologies, nobody is talking of price. The whole question is, what value do you bring to the table? And therefore, and today, especially in the post-COVID world, customer doesn't care if that person who brings that competency is operating from
Which
Trichy,
market? Right.
or Gurgaon, or in Warsaw, or in London. Customer doesn't care, and even price wise, they don't have as much of a sensitivity. There is a sensitivity, but not as much. So therefore, I think today the question is, what talent are you bringing to the table? And is that talent well equipped to solve my business problem? And
Right.
if, as long as the answer is yes, you're there. But now that is, while that is very clear and logical, it is easier said than done, because like you said, there is a huge war for talent which is going on. At Maverick, in the last 6 months, we have hired about 1,500 people in the last 6 months. And you are reading all over the international press that suddenly attrition rates have gone up in the industry.
Yeah.
There is a virtual war for talent that is going on there, and in that, to be able to recruit and onboard some 1,500 people has been very, very challenging. And I think I see us adding at least another 2,000 people over the next 12 months, and we are really gaining. And therefore, Ashu, the important point is, the shift in our strategy is, we are no more just relying on talent that is just ready, cooked and available. I just bring them on board and they start delivering a project next week, is not happening.
Right.
So I think in a number of these emerging technologies, we are recruiting people who have all the basic tech competencies and capabilities. And we have an internal program which is called Hire and Nurture, where we bring in these people and put them through, and these are not freshers I'm talking about. These are people with 3 years, 5 years, 7 years experience, who we are bringing on board. And the way we used to do with freshers in the past, put them through very intense grooming and then deploy them. Today, in these newer technologies, we are bringing on board tech people, and we are investing in them for 3 to 6 months on various kinds of projects and coaching and training before they get ready for deployment into some of these newer technologies. So, Ashu, in fact, this year we are almost investing about 6% of our revenues in just hiring people and then grooming them to be able to meet our customers' impact requirements. So therefore, the entire approach to talent is shifting quite a bit. We can no more just rely on I give out an ad and I put an army of people to interview, recruit them and deploy them
Right.
into projects. That's not really happening.
Very interesting. Subbu, thank you for giving us a view on that one. Right, I think this was very, very important, and I think I like that renewed focus that you have, to ensure that people are onboarded. Right, I think it's not, otherwise, what is happening is, when you look at that process, when you talk to people, I think there is certain coldness that is coming into that process, right? And I think that is also a fact which is leading into massive attrition, right?
Yeah.
Because people are not
Yeah.
able to relate to what they're doing, right? I think that entire orientation and ensuring that they're motivated to achieve a common goal and cause, right? I think it's just so much more important, right? So we're towards the end of the conversation, right? And my second last question in this conversation, right? What are the next 2.5 years like, right? I mean, I would have loved to ask you a 5-year question. Unfortunately, we're not in the times where I can ask you a 5-year question. But what are the next 2 years like, right? What are the key priorities, right? I mean, of course, you've given us a view in terms of, what are you looking to sort of the markets that you are looking at and the way you're dissecting them. But what are the next 2 years like, right? Are we going to see more products coming out of the Maverick stable? More clients, more services. What's the next 2 years like?
See, the next 2 years, I think I definitely see us acquiring 4 to 5 new customers in the Benelux and Nordic region. That is a very key priority for us. We definitely see ourselves expanding our delivery footprint in Europe, and we've already set up a nearshore facility in Poland, and that nearshore facility is further being invested in to grow.
Right.
Because one thing is very clear, Ashu, in the last post-COVID, we have actually continued to grow at about 30 to 35%, and last year as well as this year. And I see at least a 35 to 38% kind of a growth happening even in the next few years.
Interesting.
So we can't also therefore rely on only growing our delivery footprint in Europe. We are also growing our delivery footprint in India. And one of the things that we are doing there is, I signed up for a 400-seater facility out of Pune. And early April, we'll actually move into that facility in Pune, knowing fully well that even by April, I don't know whether everybody in Pune is going to be turning back at the office.
Right.
But then definitely we see that preparation of our infra is something which we need to continue to do, because even with all the technologies available, banks still have certain confidentiality and certain requirements for offshore delivery for data privacy and stuff like that, which we have to respect, and therefore that is something which needs to go on. So therefore, on the customer side, Europe is going to be a key market. We are investing substantially in both nearshore and offshore delivery facilities. In terms of offering, like I said, we have very clearly identified the investment areas in regulatory compliance, customer experience, and digital operations. And the next 2 years are going to be a lot more about solutions and how they solve my CXO challenges, rather than the services and competency language that we used to have in the past. We ourselves are trying to reinvent our vocabulary there and go to market with, if not productized, but at least very repeatable, tangible solutions, rather than, we are not in the business of shrink wrapped IP creation, but we definitely are looking at a very differentiated way of solving our CXO's problems.
Interesting. And Subbu, does this growth happen organically, or is there? It might. It's not really a fair question, right? But
no, it's a very fair question, because today, both from a talent standpoint as well as from an innovation standpoint, in fact, even much more from an innovation standpoint, we are actively looking at acquisitions, but not sizable acquisitions, but acquisitions which are very sharply focused in the solution areas where we are working. If it helps me accelerate my innovation and come up with solutions which are going to solve customer problems in those banks, definitely we are looking at. And I think for an organization of our size and context, those kind of key acquisitions which bring innovation and solutions on board would be very valuable.
Very interesting. So my last question, and which is actually two questions, right? I think given that you are very close to what's happening in the BFSI sector, right? And you're dealing with these institutions, right? I'd love to understand from you what are some of the key innovations, right? And not and they could be outside of the core area of focus that you have. I think that's one. Second, I want possibly quick tips, right? On leadership, right? Especially in a change in a dynamic time, right? Which are very important to your understanding for the leaders of today. There could be, CEOs, CXOs of startups, right? Well-funded startups, large organizations which are catering to many enterprise clients, large enterprise clients, right? What's your sense of it? How do you see that? I think that's an important takeaway. It's cliched, but it's an important takeaway, right? Because it just helps people think better, is how we see it, right? So I'd love to hear from you on both of these points.
See, on technology and innovation, I'm seeing significant investments happening in innovation in two areas.
Right.
One is in what you traditionally call the front office, in terms of looking at much more sharper targeting of customers. So therefore, my customer analytics and how I reach out to the right customer with the right solution is going to be very, very important for banks. So therefore, investments in all the technologies that you spoke about are around AI, predictive analytics, machine learning, deep learning, all that. I think a lot of it would go into this in targeting, identifying the right customer who's ready to do business with you. And I think that is going to be a big area. Second area, I think, is going to be in fraud and risk, and how do I do something there. In fact, even our own RBI has pointed out that almost, I think, close to 4.92 trillion rupees or something is the kind of quantum of what we face as fraud, in the financial. And therefore, I think technology is there around, addressing that part, early warning systems, fraud monitoring systems. I think today banks are also doing a tremendous amount of work there. I mean, just 2 days back, I was my dentist, and I just, by mistake, when I was making a payment, I pressed the wrong pin. Within 3 seconds, I got a phone call saying, just now you pressed the wrong pin. Was it you, or was somebody else trying to use your card?
Interesting.
That was like, I mean, even before the lady across the reception counter could tell me that my pin is wrong, I got a phone call. So banks are doing a lot of work in that space.
Phenomenal.
So I think these are two areas where I see significant amount of investments going, and wherever investments are going, innovations will sprout by itself. So
interesting.
So those are two areas.
And your view on leadership?
I think today, as an IT service company, I can tell you what is taking a lot of our time at this time. I think the next few years are all going to be our approach towards attracting and retaining the right kind of talent which can help us in the next few years of journey. I think we are every 5-7 years in the Indian market, we are at crossroads, and I think today we are at a time where we really need to rethink our approach to talent and how we are bringing talent, how we are retaining talent. I think the way things are operating right now is not at all sustainable. I mean, not going into your point about pricing and cost structures going up, but at the same time, I think we are still in many of the cutting edge technology areas. We need to be we need to continue to be seen as providers of best in class talent even in the future. And for that, I think there needs to be very different kind of industry, academia collaboration, our own approach in-house to how we engage with talent and how we groom them and bring them into some of these newer areas, keep them up. I think that is going to be a very, very significant differentiator for leaders to succeed in this space.
Super. So, how I want these conversations to sort of go on, right? And there's just so much of depth and intelligence, right, that leaders like yourself, right, are dealing with. And I think it's unfair on my end not to talk about that, right? But I'm going to save some of that for our next conversation, which we're going to have soon. Given what the industry is going through, the BFSI industry is going through, something that you are a very active and an agile part of, right? I'd love to hear from you on specific solutions that are being built by Mavericks, right? How are you tackling some of those issues? But like I said, right, we're going to save some of that for our next conversation, which we're going to do sooner with you. But thank you so much for taking the time out. I think this was absolutely phenomenal. I think not a lot of people sitting on the outside, right, can understand the challenges, right? From them, it's a very single transactional relationship that they have with banking institutions, right? But as soon as you start looking at the role of banking institutions, and as soon as you start, for example, in a market like India, which is a very large ship, right, the challenges are unfathomable, right? They're so
Yeah,
much more complex.
true.
In an environment like that, the pressure is on you, which I think you've prepared yourself very well in terms of handling it. My sense is, I think this is an industry which is going through a sea change for better. I think the velocity of capital is increasing, and I think institutions are preparing themselves for doing that. And I think you're playing a very critical role. Subbu, thank you so much for taking the time out. I loved
Thank
every bit
you.
of this conversation, and look to have you with us much sooner. Like I said, thank
Thanks
you.
once again. Thank you.